again, and welcome back to another video where today we're doing something completely different to what I would usually do on this channel. Now, it's been a while since I've made a video, and I promise it's for good reason. Since July-ish time, I've been doing some sound design for a game called Unspottable. It's a really fun local multiplayer game where the objective is basically you're put into an environment with your friends. The problem is you all look identical, even identical to the multiple NPCs that are running around. And what you need to do is find your friends within this crowd of NPCs and give them a good hit, a slap, before they find you and do the same. And it's a really funny twist because basically the premise is you have to pretend to be one of these NPCs and kind of mimic what they do whilst finding where you are in the game and also finding your friends. So yeah, it's out too. It's on Steam. It came out, 24th, so it came out a couple of days ago now. Check that out if you're interested. It's on Steam, again, Unspottable, and I'll have links to it in the description. The reason why I'm making this video today is because I thought, now that I've just finished this project, by the way, this was my first commercial video game project that I've worked on. Like, I'll admit I'm a newbie still in the grand scheme of things. I thought it might be a good idea to share with you all the 5 things I've learned, or 5 things, there we go, 5, that I learned doing sound design on my first commercial project and for Unspottable, in case any of you guys are in a similar boat to me. So yeah, sit back, relax, I guess. And here we are. Let's start off with lesson number 1. Okay, so the first thing I learned is to keep your DAWs or your projects organised. Now, that might sound pretty obvious, and I suppose it kind of is really obvious. But what you're looking at on screen now is the first Reaper project I set up when working for these guys. So what they did is, when we first started working together, they gave me a big list of sounds, basically like a sound document that needed to be created. So they give me the name of the sound, its purpose, a brief description, the name of the file that they wanted it as a WAV file, the deliverable, and little bits of other information. And yeah, I was just working through the list. Thankfully, where it's kind of a small game, there's only about a handful of sounds, or unique sounds I should say, per level, and then there'll be like a bit larger kind of general sounds that will be heard in every level. For example, the actual punch-in, winning sounds, etc. But yeah, so the idea is I'd create a DAW, a Reaper project, which was the DAW originally in Reaper, for each kind of level, and say, okay, for these 7 sounds, I'll put it in this project, then in the next 7 sounds, the next level, put it in another, and so on. So what you're looking at is like the first Reaper project I created, and as you can see, it's a total mess. It's embarrassing, actually. Like, look at it. It's it's all grey. All the sounds are like on top. Well, apart from this bit, all the sounds, even though these are different sounds, or I think these are variations, but they're all on top of each other, which is a nightmare. I don't know why I didn't spread it across the timeline. But there you go, it's a really bad practice. Generally, when making sound effects, or a lot of sound effects in a DAW, you kind of want to spread them out across the timeline so you can access them quite quickly and listen to, the different ones and compare and stuff. But I didn't think of that. I was an idiot, and I did it this way to start off with. So the reason why it turns out is really important is for a few reasons. One reason is that if you ever need to go back to the project, when you're working in it, it kind of doesn't matter too much. I mean, it slows you down a little bit, but because you made the project and it's fresh in your mind, you know where everything is. So if you need to find something in particular, you just go to it. But what happened with me is when I got to the end of the project, and I wanted to borrow some elements from some of the earlier sounds I made into the latest sounds, I'd go back to this project and it was just a nightmare trying to find the bits I needed. Like, I'd be muting stuff I'd have to test and listen to which is which. I mean, there's a bit of labelling on the tracks, but there's none on the mark. Well, okay, there is a bit on the markers, but it's not very clear. Robot 1, 2, 3, just variations. So yeah, it was just nightmare trying to pull old elements, old layers and stuff and bring them into new projects. Another thing I found out is that if you've ever loaded up a project and had that horrible error message saying, a file is missing or the location of a file was moved, I feel like whilst this is more kind of a front end practice, organising your DAW, and those files missing are more to do with where they are in the folders or on the location on your actual desktop or your hard drive. I feel like it helps having the project organised for those areas because you can at least see which track was missing its file. So look, in this case, let's say this was missing, I could just, well, bad example because the project's really awful looking, but do you know what I mean? It will have that blank sort of region instead of having the usual kind of filled-in amplitude of it. So yeah, those are 2 reasons right off the bat why you should have an organised project. So what happened is, as I started continuing working for them, I developed this little scheme, which I'm quite proud of. It's really nice and easy for me. So as you can see, let's start with the colours first, because that's the bit I'm quite proud of. So what I've done is I've colour-coded each sound. So each sound has its own colour. So this cars one is its own sound and will be delivered as its own audio file. Trapdoors another, obstacle, etc, etc. And to separate them, obviously colours, but the colours I picked, because at first I was just picking random colours, but I decided to use the rainbow. So I remember at school learning that the colours of the rainbow go, you use this rhyme, you use Richard of York gave battle in vain, which tells you that the colours are red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, right? So what I do is I just go down in that order, and then when I got to the end and I had more sounds, which was rare, then I just start again from red. And yeah, it's just a very easy way to kind of separate them. I can easily see which sounds are which, and they're not random. I've also made sure that the tracks match the markers in colour. The markers actually have clear labels now, so these are the labels of the actual deliverable. So theatre_obstacle was the name of the file they wanted. As you can see, they're not kind of all on top of each other in the timeline. They're now kind of one after the other. So yeah, really easy to work with now. You probably have your own practices for organising your DAWs, but yeah, feel free to borrow it. Lesson 2 is more of a kind of psychological lesson, I suppose. It's don't get too attached to your sounds. Now this might not be a problem for you, but for me, it really was. And I kind of should have known this going into it. But basically, when you're like making sounds just for fun at home, and you're not making it for anyone else, you've got all the time in the world, really. You can take your time, you can experiment, you can have a bit of fun, and you can, well, take your time, and you can use as much time as you need to get that kind of perfect sound you're after, or at the very least, you know, something you're satisfied with. But when working on any commercial project, as I soon found out, time is not on your side, really. So what happened in the beginning is I soon realised I was spending way too long on some of the early sounds, just because they were, some of them in particular, I just wasn't happy with. As much time as I spent on them, I couldn't get to sound right. And it was, you know, it got to the point where I was like making these changes, but they weren't making the sound any better. They were just making it sound different. So I was hitting this creative wall almost, driving myself crazy. And these weren't even like crucial sounds. Like, my priorities were a bit, well, you know, I just wanted everything to sound good. I wanted the next sound I worked on to sound better than the last, basically. Even if it was just the sound was less important than the first. So yeah, that was a bit of a mistake, which thankfully I kind of realised soon that, okay, can't be spending too long on every sound. But there was one or two sounds in particular where I just got so fed up, so frustrated, I just said to myself, look, I'm just going to have to send it to them. The draft's rough, but it's something, it's a start. Maybe their feedback will help. So I sent it to them, and to my surprise, they actually really loved it. They were happy with it. And whilst I was still listening to it, thinking to myself, are you sure? Yeah, that doesn't sound good to me. They were happy with it. So yeah, I went, okay, fine, we'll stick with it. And that kind of reminded me, or not reminded me, after a while, that kind of helped me with lesson 3, which is, it's not your vision, it is the developers. So you're going through the list, right? Everything's normal, everything's going well. You're doing the sounds, great. But you might start to get your own creative ideas. And like I said at the beginning, what they'd sent me is, which again is quite common, a list of the sounds they wanted and a brief description of how it should sound. And in some cases, I kind of didn't follow that description. I had my own ideas of how it would sound. I don't know if any of you have watched Ed, Edd and Eddy when you were young, but oh my god, I loved that cartoon when I was growing up. It's like a very slapstick heavy cartoon, and the sound design is no exception. Like, they just use like the most, at glance, sounds like the most random sounds. Like, you know, they don't even fit. Like, for example, someone might get hit or fall over and you'll hear like a sumo wrestler or something. And yeah, I suppose the purpose of that is, it's not supposed to obviously mimic what you're seeing on screen, it's just to add comedic value to it. And because the game's very colourful, bright, it's fun, it's clearly aimed at like, well, I mean, it's aimed for everyone really, but like, you know, it's child-friendly, I suppose. You know, my interpretation of their game was, oh, it should sound really fun and almost funny, which is a bit different to fun, I think, comical. So I was adding all these I was taking all these slapstick inspiration and kind of applying it to the sounds. And I'd add, so say for example, I'm trying to think of one. there's a bit in the game where like it shows you the score, right? It shows you the score from the end of the round, and you'd have like these tubes, and the players would kind of, or like these kind of, yeah, like they're little ragdoll basically copies of the players landing in these bowls, and I would add like doorbell sounds and kind of, what else did I add? Squeaky dog toys on top of the kind of glass and the tube sounds, because I thought it sounded funny, and I guess it did. But they came back to me and said, listen, that's not really what we're going for here. So can you dial down all the slapstick, all the extra things you're adding? And at the time, if I'm honest with myself, I got a little bit, I was annoyed. I thought, oh, that's funny. What? That works. Why do you know, I'm the expert here almost. But yeah, I kind of had to just say, listen, remind yourself, Henry, at the end of the day, you're making this for them. Whilst you might have the opinion that your sounds, or your opinion of the sounds, is better than theirs because they're, you know, just the programmers or the artists or whatever, you're the sound designer. That's not for you to say. They've taken you on to fulfill their vision that they've been working on for the past year and a half, and you've only been working on for a week. And there was a few other instances when this happened, even working on the trailer, which was towards the end of the project. So I still hadn't learned my lesson. It was just something I had to keep reminding myself. Just remind yourself, and that kind of takes a bit of the emotion out of it. And it kind of also speeds things up as well, because you're less, you know, I guess lesson 2 and lesson 3 were very much related. You know, I was trying to perfect them for myself and spending extra time on these sounds to make them sound like how I wanted. But I guess the moral of the story is, get them sounding, get a draft that works, and send it to them and get feedback, because you're there to fulfill their purpose. Your purpose is to fulfill their vision. So yeah, 2 and 3, they're more psychological, but they're very closely related. Okay, lesson 4 is a bit more technical again. It is to format your DAW. Before working on this project, I pretty much just used Reaper as it came to me, as in all the settings were defaulted. But luckily for me, around the time of me joining with the guys working on Unspottable, Akash the Car, who I'm sure you know him, who he is. He's got his name about in the old sound design world. But yeah, he was just started this little series on YouTube, which I'll have a link to in the description if you haven't yet checked it out. It's basically just a guide to using Reaper, taking you from the very basics, getting the DAW set up, and going into some more technical stuff and more fun stuff, more creative stuff. But the early videos, the setting it up and kind of getting the parameters how you want it was so helpful. It was it was crazy because I was discovering all these parts of Reaper that I didn't know. It'd be from little things. For example, one of my favourite little things, if I zoom in on one of these regions, is that you can kind of, as you can see here, I've got a little dial here which allows me to adjust the volume of a specific region. But originally I think it defaults as the way you adjust the volume is by hovering your cursor on the top line of the region and then dragging a line down. But you can switch that to a dial. It doesn't sound like much, but it's really easy to use this dial, and that line's a little bit hard. And yeah, I can just, if I do make a change and don't like it, I can just double click and it goes back to default. So yeah, that was a nice little change. The big thing, which I feel almost silly for not knowing that Reaper did this, is that there is a media explorer, and oh my god, did this save my bacon. So yeah, it's kind of like how, if you've ever used like a third-party kind of sound app, like Soundly, Reaper has its own kind of inbuilt version of that, where you can just find a folder on your desktop or on your Mac or whatever, and just reference the files in those locations and use them within your project. So it's so easy to just grab a sound, trial it, bang, in it goes. And yeah, I had no idea this existed, but it was so useful. So yeah, once I discovered this, thanks to Akash, got all my sounds, I kind of made a nice little neat library, put them in one place, set it up, and yeah, now I can just pull all the sounds I need from here. I can even search for stuff, like if I need a metal sound, I can just type metal, and I've got all my sounds that are labelled metal. It's so good. Again, if this is obvious to you, great, but yeah, I feel a bit silly that I didn't know this before, so I thought I'd share it in case you didn't. Links to Akash's series is in the description. Definitely worth checking out to get your Reaper nice and set up, ready for a big project. And finally, lesson 5 is to ask for context on how your sounds will be used in the game. Now, as you can see, this is the game. This is it. This is Unspottable. I brought it up because I want to quickly show you a sound where I made it. And how it was used in the game was a little bit different to how I thought it was going to be used. Now earlier I obviously said that I had that document that had the list of sounds that I needed and a description of what they wanted to sound like. But it didn't tell you much on how the sound would be used and played back in the game and where it'd be played back in the game. For most of the sounds, it was kind of obvious because, you know, they were, like I said earlier, they were level specific. But yeah, there was one in particular, well, there's a couple, but there's one I'm going to show you where I should have really asked for a bit more context. It was my fault, not theirs. So there's this factory level, right? And as you can see here, there's these sirens. I don't know if you can see my mouse there through OBS, but just in the corner of these big yellow crusher thingies, there's these sirens. And the idea is that, you know, at random points in the game, these crushers are going to come down, but before they do, these sirens are going to start spinning to alert the player and give them a bit of chance to move out of the way, right? Now these sirens, they're like red, kind of almost police sirens. They just kind of, the light kind of goes round in a circle. I kind of assumed that they'd need a looping sound, and they'd need to, what they would do in the programming of the game is as soon as that siren started playing is tell the sound to play, let it loop. We were using Fmod, by the way, obviously, so that would be easy. And then once the siren stopped, just tell the sound to stop. Turns out they did something kind of different. So what I'm going to do is quickly play you the sound now as it sounded before I sent it to them, and basically how it sounded in my DAW, and then how it sounds in the game now. But yeah, so it's not looping, is it? That's not kind of seamless. You can hear gaps in between the kind of flashes. So it turns out that they would, instead of playing it and stopping it at the end, they were triggering it at the beginning of each rotation. They were treating the sound as a one-shot. So I kind of screwed up there. Had I known, I probably wouldn't have made a looping sound. I would have made a one-shot, and one that would have kind of fit a little bit better. Because you can kind of hear where the sound kind of cuts almost a little bit abruptly. Obviously, had I asked and knew that that's how they're going to do it, I could have made it fade a bit easier, so it sounds a little bit more natural. Yeah, luckily it's not the worst thing in the world, but yeah, it's kind of realised or highlighted to me the importance that we need to help communicate the point to any developers that we're working on. If we aren't too familiar with sound, that yeah, just provide us with as much context. How the sound's going to be played, how it's going to be triggered, if it needs to loop, how many instances of that sound are you going to play, loads or not many, which is another thing we had to kind of control in this game. Yeah, there's all sorts of things to know. It's a big job to get all those answers out of them, but don't be afraid to, or don't be lazy, essentially, like I was, and just thought, oh, I know how it works. Don't assume. Yeah, because as you can hear or heard, it does play a bit of a role. And there we go. That's the 5 things I learned, or 5 of the things, probably a few more, but 5 of the main things I learned whilst working on Unspottable, my very first commercial sound design project. So I hope you enjoyed. I certainly hope you found it helpful. There's definitely a lot more I want to do evolving around this game. Like I took a kind of unique approach to mixing it, which I thought might be an interesting thing to show you guys. If you let me know if you'd be interested in hearing that, how I mixed it, or even if you just like to know, if you check out the game and maybe you think, oh, I like that sound, Henry, how did you make that? Let me know. I'd happily do some sound design tutorials on this, because there's plenty of material to work with. In fact, I probably will do that. But yeah, what I'm trying to say is I'd love some feedback. I'd love some comments. It's all really appreciated. Any support you can send to the developers, we massively appreciate it. Yeah, and other than that, I hopefully am going to try and do some more Fmod and Unity tutorials, and some more Wise ones as well, because I've been getting a lot of comments about both of those things. Thank you, by the way, if you were one of those. So yeah, I've been Henry Scott. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.